It's 5. I think we'll go ahead and get started. JP, I'm sure will join shortly. We'll go ahead and call the May 5th, 2020 school board meeting to order. And we will turn it over, Steve, to you for our updates.
Sounds good. And I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team shortly. I'll tell you we had a couple milestones this week that are important that they will bring you up to speed on. One would be the number of meals that we've served. Alison will be able to talk about that when we get down into operations. And Amy and Diane will be able to bring you up to speed on workbook distribution, which went amazingly smoothly today. And then when we get into the long-term planning piece, I will share what little additional news I have for you on long-term planning. And then we'll be more than happy to answer any additional questions you have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Amy and the teaching and learning team for our education update.
Right, I'll jump in. I'm going to be pretty brief tonight. The first thing I'd say, we've had a couple just important days of recognition. One for Lunch Hero Day. We had a Principals Day, and then of course Teacher Appreciation this week. And so kind of a fun time to try to reflect on the good work our folks do on a consistent basis and the commitment they have to the students and families in our district, and certainly want to recognize them for all their efforts during this time. And while we don't get to celebrate that in person, there's been some cool things happening social media wise. Kristen put out a nice video for us to recognize some of that work going on too. So just wanted to take a minute to thank those people for that work, and in all capacities. It means a lot to be an educator right now, and to be able to provide that connection and learning opportunities to our kids. So secondary wise, I would just say we're a full weekend, and we kind of feel like we're hitting our rhythm a little bit. We talked today, secondary principals wise, about some participation numbers, and they've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of kids engaged and participating through the required environment at the high school, and then also even junior high, though it's under the guise of voluntary. There's been a bigger uptick in students participating and being engaged in classrooms on a consistent basis or in those learning experiences. I think just from the routine and some of the structures we put around it from that standpoint. So I think overall a really positive start to that. Of course, we still have some students we're trying to continue to reach out and engage with that we either haven't heard from or haven't seen engaging in our coursework. So that's an important part of what we talked about this week, today, even this week, then as a strategy for those building teams to continue to reach out to families and see what they are ready and willing and able to do, and make sure they're positioned, or that we could meet any needs to help them be engaged if that's what they want to do at this point. And so we feel pretty good about that. We've continued to talk more about graduation. I talked to you quite a bit about that last week, about waiting, giving people that date about the 29th of May that we'll have a decision for a traditional ceremony that we try to go forward with, or a non-traditional event that could look more like a photo opportunity for a student to come on campus, get their diploma, get a picture, their awards, and then put together some kind of a video component with that. So those are the options we're continuing to try to seek out and refine and get some further details on, and building principals and their teams will start continuing to develop two solutions for what that graduation piece could look like. But I think from a learning perspective, we feel like we have a good percentage of our students engaged, and that move to required really kind of grab people's attention and has some good structure around it. So with that, I'll turn it to Amy, and then I'm sure we'll take questions wherever you guys have them at the end.
Good evening, everyone. The elementary teachers continue to support the 5 goals that we're working on with our families, our parents, and our students. Connecting, community building twice a week through Zoom meetings, encouraging our families to log on through Clever so that they can access a plethora of opportunities there, educational, online opportunities. Of course, Dreambox and Lexia sit behind that Clever badge as well. And then the workbooks, they were released today. So that's exciting thing that took place today from 8 to 4 o'clock. And I'll share some statistics around that. And then our sixth goal area, which isn't public facing, it's just one that we have the teachers working on, is they have a professional development requirement right now that they are to be engaged in learning around Seesaw. And that would be the learning management system that we would expect all elementary classroom teachers to use next fall, regardless of whether we're in the mode of doing some remote learning or not. Just a little bit then on where we're at with our statistics. Last week we saw Clever Access, about 74% of our students accessing Clever. And so again, just knowing that they're going into Clever tells us that our Dreambox and Lexia could be as high as 74% since we see that amount of students logging in. Last week, our Dreambox percent of students logging in was at 64% and Lexia was at 58%. Now, interestingly enough, that's just who's logging, that percentage of students who are logging in each week. We're also starting to monitor just that overall total for the percent of kids that have logged in. So as an example, during the month of April, we now understand that 85% of our student body have logged in through Clever. So that's another interesting statistic to continue to track. So we're reaching 85% of our families with the message that we want them involved in that work. So then today we hosted the elementary reading and math workbook pickup, and just want to thank all of our people that were out there doing the distribution, especially in this poor weather. We didn't pick the best day, but we wanted to get the workbooks out since they had arrived. The reading workbooks were in on Monday last week, and we received the math on Friday, so it was exciting to get those out. We had principals on staff, instructional coaches, teacher librarians, school family advocates, teachers and custodians. We asked that our buildings roughly have around 3 people staged, and I know that they took some shifts during the day as well. And I'm probably missing a variety of groups that I haven't thanked there, but I just want to thank anybody that was out there willing to help distribute. And I know that that our people were excited to see our families and see our students. So it was an extra special day for us for sure. We are tracking pickup rates, and building principals were asked to start inputting that in a document tonight. And so far, we've got maybe about 60% of the buildings responding. We've seen anywhere, our lowest, it looks like pickup threshold was around 60% of our students receiving workbooks, all the way up to 95%. So we'll monitor that. Chase and I then tomorrow morning, and Matt are meeting with a small team of elementary principals to look at our statistics and then to think about what next steps we might want to take with the workbook distribution. And with that, you know, we've started to turn the conversation as we have this, our goal areas up and running now, to really be thinking about what return to learn could look like for the fall. I know that Steve shared that he will make some comments about that, but that's certainly top of mind for us, and what instruction is going to look like, and then, you know, how we are going to keep our student body and our staff safe in this new environment that we find ourselves in. So with that, we'll take some questions.
Hey, Matt, can you, I was reading in the West Side Weekly that it has like a statistic in there that they're still looking for 78 students who haven't reported. I mean, is that fairly common amongst the 3 high schools, or and maybe additionally Tate? I didn't have that many students, but then also, Amy, what is the goal? Is to get everyone a workbook? I mean, or what is the end game with the workbooks then for the people that didn't pick up?
I think that's
that would be wonderful.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Amy and I do this to each other all day long, so I think we're used to it. But, yeah, that number, Paul, we talked about that specific thing today, honestly. And so that was a amount of students that hadn't responded to that initial survey kind of stating intent. And so really our focus right now has turned on to students that need credits or were failing classes and that we didn't hear from. Some of the students that wouldn't have completed that survey have since engaged in class and are participating. And so you know, they're kind of in that good standing piece, and we're not as concerned from that regard. So we've kind of shifted from trying to capture intent to now the students that would be missing credit opportunities or just not engaging, even if they stated they were going to. And so the good news from all of that is I do think that number is fairly accurate, that we have a small number of kids, on each of the 3 large campuses, and Anne's doing work at Tate the same way, trying to identify those students and then having teacher teams or teachers or counselors, SFAs reach out to them. So I do feel like we've probably, I would say, heard from more kids than we maybe even thought or anticipated. And so that was a positive for us. We thought maybe we'd have to do some deeper digging there, but I would just say, administrators and teachers have done an amazing job of continuing to reach out and try to hook kids in that way. So I hope that answers what you wanted from that.
So Matt, could I just ask, is there any feeling yet for what obstacles, things kids are experiencing that are making them not to be terribly engaged at this point, or are we too far away to know very much about what they're seeing?
Sure. I mean, I think it would be, it's going to be a little bit unique for any family, Charlie, but I think it's probably anything you would think about. I mean, some kids are getting potentially pulled to work different directions. I mean, we even have, some that their time has increased on the job, depending on if they're doing some of those service roles that are still requiring them to show up to work. Some are in positions at home where they're taking care of family members and things like that. And so their ability to participate and stay engaged in those courses is limited from that deal. Some also could be potentially and just aren't. And so we're also following up with those students and trying to say, you've indicated you want to do this. You've participated pretty regularly when we had you in there. What's going on? How can we help get you started? And so I think that's going to be a unique situation for every student a little bit. And so that's why we're having those kind of trusted adults or people that are close to them follow up and say, how can we get you engaged, or what's preventing you from doing that? Or is there a different way we can reach you? Or is there a different time we can talk to you that way? So I'd say those barriers you think about, of course, language, could be a barrier. I think that's one we've talked about in here before. So then continuing to send resources to those families and to those students so that they can access and be able to participate. So any one of those things I'd say we've thought about and tried to consider how to connect, but obviously we're not batting 100%, and we'll continue to work on that.
Okay, thanks for your summary.
Matt, can you also comment on how the cap and gown distribution went?
Yeah, very well. I don't have percentages on how many exactly we got out, but the principals all reported that was a kind of like Amy's workbook distribution thing, to see the families or see the kids and, be able to pass on something positive. That was a really neat experience to do that, even though it's not the way they'd like to be receiving their cap and gown. It was still probably a positive event for them to engage in, and a feel good moment for the campuses. So by all accounts, that went relatively smooth, and we got those out to folks and gave us some ideas for, some potential other opportunities that we're looking at when we think about how graduation and things go, and how to continue to promote those pieces and make them a positive event.
Other questions on teaching and learning? Thanks, Matt and Amy.
All right.
I think we're ready.
Thank you.
Wait.
Yeah, Adam, anything that you'd like to add on where we're at for technology right now?
Yep, just quick numbers updates. We are at 3,192 devices fulfilled, 3,215 requests, so 99.3%, includes all requests through this morning. Returning students, this was asked at a previous meeting, returning students will keep the devices through the summer, so we won't be collecting at the end of the spring here. And then on the internet service side, continue to work through installs with Mediacom. We're also still working to obtain additional hotspots, but at this point, the district has provided internet service to 930 students and families. And that is all I had.
Wonderful, thank you. Questions for Adam?
How many requests are you still looking to fill on hotspots, Adam?
Currently, for the hotspot side of things, we have about 30 that we're looking to fill. And then on the MediaCom side, for home installs, looks like we're still at about 180. And they're still doing about 30 to 40 per day.
And is it, do you know if it's certain areas or is it spread out across the district? And the only reason I asked is because I read an interesting article the other day about how some districts are using school buses and kind of parking them in neighborhoods for the day with wireless on them. And I didn't know if that's I mean, obviously we have a big district, so that might not be a solution. But.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that's more of a, we're giving an appearance that you're doing something, to be frank. When you put a wireless hotspot in a bus, unless it's a beautiful, nice day out and people are going to sit out and socially distance around the bus, that signal is unlikely to penetrate into residences at all. So for the most part, the other challenge that we looked at when we did look at that briefly is that a lot of our highest need areas are actually fairly high density, or at least medium density residential, where parking's at a premium. So our ability to put a bus out there, especially with people home more of the day, would be a challenge as well. So we haven't really gone down that route.
I will tell you, we have had the conversation that if this doesn't hammer home the idea that internet access ought to start to be considered like water and electricity, and it ought to be considered like a utility with universal access. If people haven't figured that out after this, they're never going to figure it out.
Agreed.
All right, any other questions? Any other questions on tech?
Thanks, Adam.
From a long-term planning standpoint, we had hoped that we would have an update from the Department of Ed yesterday or today on the Return to Learn plan. We do not have that yet. We have had a couple of meetings on that at the state level with other SUPs. What we do know right now is it's going to look a lot like the requirements that we have for what we're doing at the high school level right now, which is a set of reassurances from the district on things that we are promising to do. The Department of Ed is likely to give us fairly significant latitude on how we complete that process. Again, that's due for us July 1st. We're not going to get too far into it until I actually release the plan for it, so we understand exactly what the expectations are. We do know, at least generally, what the 6 main areas that they want us to focus on. Those are things that we've already been talking about as we look across the country right now. Multiple organizations are starting to promote return to learn thinking and planning. The American Enterprise Institute just dropped one today. The New Teacher Project out of California dropped one. I believe it came out last Friday or Saturday morning. So we're starting to see some national level attention to this. I think one of the things that's a plus for that is it will help systematize this process and actually then hopefully create some resources that we'll be able to tap into as we start to plan for what's next. I think one of the things that was a big topic of conversation, and we'll have to talk more about as we get a little bit further in here at the state level, is what does the governor's forgiveness of the August 24th, remember August 23rd is our start date, but that falls on a Sunday this year, so we're talking about August 24th. What does the relaxation of an August 24th start date mean? From the last meeting we had with the Department of Ed, it's pretty clear that there will not be funding for additional days of school, but that the August 1st potential to move up the start of school is simply to allow districts that want to start early to have the opportunity to do that, but they would still be constrained to the funding mechanism that we have, and essentially the idea of 180 days of school. And so big topic of conversation at the UN about what that might actually mean for school calendars and whether that was reasonable. And to be perfectly frank with you, the questions that came up and the obstacles that were presented by the 17 large districts make that significantly problematic. And one of the things that we talked about locally was the impact that would have on everything from our current summer meal program to our extended school year program to our construction process. So we will definitely keep you posted on that. My presumption is that we're going to hear something a little bit later this week So if that's the case, we'll be able to provide you an update next week, and if not, certainly the week after that. But while those are due July 1st, our goal is to have ours completed by the end of May. So we've got plenty of time to share that with you, have you take a look at it. And then if we need to make any revisions, we'll have plenty of time to do that before it's actually required for submission. The questions that I or the team can answer about long-term planning right now.
I have a concern that I expressed last meeting. It's not about instruction so much as it is health and safety of students in the building, staff in the building, parents in the buildings. We all read widely what's happening nationally now. I would say it's very likely that the COVID virus will continue to infect people, including people in Johnson County, including people in this school district. So can you indicate what you're hearing from the state now about that aspect of returning to in-classroom instruction?
That's a great question, Charlie. That actually came up last Tuesday with the Department of Ed advisory committee that I serve on, came up again last Friday in the AEA meeting that I had with other superintendents. At this point in time, they have not released any guidance. We have asked very, very specific questions, a lot of general questions, but specific questions about what does social distancing mean? We know from watching the Danes, for instance, that they've got their kids 6 feet apart. So is that an expectation that when we come in, the kids are going to have to be 6 feet apart? We've asked questions about sanitization of learning areas. How often does it occur? To what degree? We've talked about expectations for behavioral changes, whether it's how frequently kids wash their hands or things like that. The state has indicated that they are very concerned about those issues, but at this point in time, they have not issued any specific guidance for it. We were also told that there's a fairly good likelihood that they will actually not issue guidance on that prior to when we are required to have our plan submitted. So we may have to make some judgment calls on that ourselves. One of the things that they're going to ask for is an assurance that health and safety of students and staff, and by relation, the extended families of the kids that come to school here and the folks that work here are part of our planning process. But by the time we get to that submission standpoint, they may not yet have some of that detailed expectations set for us. And so then it'll just be an assurance on our part that when those are released, that we will follow them.
Yes. So remind me again when our plan is due.
Our plan's due July 1st.
Thank
We'd
you.
like to have it to you early June so that you've got an opportunity to look at it, ask questions. And if we need to make any revisions, we can have those done with plenty of time.
So what happens if we submit a plan or a district submits a plan and then the state comes out with more specific guidance that's not, that's more stringent than the plans are that have been submitted already?
So for instance, that's a great question, Janet. So for instance, in the health and safety arena, what they're going to ask us is an assurance that we will follow what the state has released to date, and that if the state changes those expectations, that we will commit to following those. So we may decide that 6 feet apart is an appropriate distance. That may be part of our plan. The state may come out later and say they want it to be. So that wouldn't invalidate our plan, because the assurance that we would have signed would say that plan is 6 feet at this time, but if the state changes the expectation, then we will follow the state expectation.
And I get it. Conditions are changing. Everyone's monitoring and watching and seeing what happens. I mean, I sort of get that. It's just kind of rolling planning based on conditions to date.
I think what they're really looking for is they're looking for a commitment from districts across the state that that these areas are part of their planning process. They don't want kids to come back in the fall and districts to be caught by surprise because they didn't fully focus on one of the areas. And then they also want you to commit to staying up to speed with it. So if the state changes expectations, that, as you said, you're ready to roll with it and change your expectations to match the state.
What's some of your hypothetical thinking on how we're going to keep, just say 1,500 kids 6 feet apart at one of our large high schools?
Well, that's one we haven't solved yet, JP. If you look at what's happening in Europe right now, They focused primarily, again, the Danes are probably the best example where they've been at it the longest. Kids under 12 are in school. They don't have enough physical space in their schools. So with everything else being closed right now, they've actually been able to reach out into other communal spaces and turn those into learning environments. Obviously, that's temporary. If the economy begins to reopen, those spaces won't be available. We've had conversations about, do we have to start looking at using secondary schools for elementary classrooms? But then, as Amy would tell you, we're going to run into a numbers problem. We don't have enough staff to cover those classes if we divide all of our groups of kids by two, for instance. And so, again, we'll probably follow their lead in the sense that we're going to be looking at our youngest kids first, our elementary kids, try to figure out what options might be available to us. We've talked about whether we have to run in shifts, morning and afternoon, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. One of the things that you pointed out with the high school was the number. Right now in Europe, they're running staggered start times. So the kids come in waves. That allows them to ensure that there's adequate space as they enter and exit the school. Obviously, with elementary kids, they tend to stay in one room most of the day. That makes it a little bit easier. You don't have passing times and things like that, like we have at the high school. So I think much of the way that high school is structured today is going to be really problematic for us. I will share one of the other conversation pieces that we had as a cabinet group is we recognize that we have some students. I think of our English language learners, our special ed kids, regardless of grade level, they may need to be with us all day, every day. And so we may have to plan for an expectation that some of our students with the greatest needs are actually physically present in school, and when we may have to work around that too. So that's part of our initial thinking as we try to, I guess, set up as many scenarios as we can as we're waiting to find out what the actual parameters are.
If we did have some sort of a staggered every other day, would we be incorporating kind of online learning along with that for those days when kids might not be in school?
That's the idea, that you would have the opportunity while they were physically present in school to provide that direct instruction. And then the teachers would have that ability to assign work to be done outside the school day when they're on their off time, whether it's an afternoon or an every other day type of thing.
Does this think, in my head, just that seems like it's going to be a lot, maybe more work for teachers, as in additional time. And I wonder if the state will, if they're not going to pay us for extra days, but that it's kind of like you'd be doing two jobs instead of one job. And so, I don't know if there's going to be provision for that, but that's going to be a heavy lift, I think.
I can share one thing with you, which is that we've had at least a couple of our creative UEN peers who've actually talked about whether or not they have some teachers that are focusing on the online learning portion and some teachers that are focusing on the in-person portion, so that you may be a classroom teacher that has students 4 days a week. You may have an A-B group, and then you may be a teacher who's working predominantly online, providing support for kids when they're not physically present in school. So there's been the good news is there's been a lot of creative conversation at the table about what types of options might be available for us. Other long-term, yes, Charlie.
I just reiterate what I think I said our last meeting or two, is that it seems I just frankly don't have very much confidence that the state's going to understand how to put in students in classrooms safely. I don't have a lot of confidence in their advice on how to do that. I do think we have expertise here locally. We have a very good county public health system, have some great people at the university in public health and in medicine in various places there that I think that could help us to do that. So my interest for the board is to see if we can organize ourselves in such a way as to get that local expertise available to the staff and to the board as fairly quickly, so we can get an idea of what we would have to do if we return to in-class learning in the fall.
One thing I can offer for you, Charlie, is that actually twofold perhaps. One is that We are pretty tightly connected with the county group that's working to process all the information. So well connected, everything from Johnson County Emergency right down through UIHC and the university. And then I'd also share that we've been having a lot of conversations with university admin team as they look to figure out what campus life is going to look like in the fall. And so I think hopefully through both of those, we'll be able to tap some of that expertise, because I think a decision like this has some pretty hefty ramifications for our kids, for our staff, for their family members, and obviously then long-term for the health of the community. All right, other questions on long-term planning?
This isn't necessarily long-term planning, but I guess it kind of is right now. And maybe this is for Matt. The only activities that I can think of that are still kind of left for this school year that haven't been decided upon are the baseball, softball, and is that, I think June 1st is now the new deadline. Is that correct, or have you heard any updates on that?
I have not heard any updates, and I think that's a correct summary, Paul. I'd say, you know, at the risk of speculating, I think that's always dangerous, but I mean, I don't think it's probably likely. I don't think we're seeing any indications that's likely, but at the same time, yeah, June 1st is what we've been told on that one.
All right, then we will transition to a summary from operations. So Chase, you and your team want to take it away?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Three things today. First, Steve mentioned it off the top. Our meal count, it continues to climb. We hit 140,000 meals served on Monday. And so just a tremendous effort by our school lunch heroes, as Matt mentioned. We celebrated them last week. Some stats, since April 13th, we've averaged over 3,000 people a day through our sites. The last 2 weeks, we've averaged over 3,500 people a day through our sites. And thanks to Amy and her workbook distribution today, I think we had our highest total so far. We had 3,937 people come through our sites today. And so that is our highest total by over 100. And despite the rain, I do believe it's because folks were out getting workbooks. So that's great, right? We want to make sure that we continue to get meals in the hands of the community's children. And so we will keep plugging away. We have a plan in place for the rest of the month, which we have shared. And that leads into my second point. Next week at board meeting and then out publicly, we are going to share what our end of school access plan is for both staff and students, along with, to the point that Paul and kind of Charlie were making, what we see for at least the first half of the summer. And so we're going to send it out all in one communication next week to really provide what are the access points, what are our protocols going to continue to be, and what does it look like in terms of activities or events happening on our campuses, at least for the first half of the summer. The university, as Steve mentioned, put out some of their guidance last week about what they are doing with their campus over the summer. And so we just kind of work through a number of the pieces, what our lunch program will look like in the summer, being one of those major ones that we want to make sure that we take into consideration. We believe we'll be in a position to put that information out next week to not only our parents, but also our staff. And so we can have some additional conversation at next week's board meeting. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on this evening was the June 2nd election. Election. The Secretary of State has said that the elections will go on. And if you read the governor's proclamation last week, she said that even if school facilities are closed, that they still need to be available to be used as public voting sites. We, of course, want to be a good partner with our county, as we have been in the past. I received my form for my absentee ballot just this week in the mail, so I'm sure you're getting yours. And there is a big push for people to vote absentee, to keep that, to keep the actual number of people in the sites down. But we've been working with the auditor's office to plan for that. Dwayne and I are kind of spearheading that for us and working with Travis and his team over at the county about what that might look like. What they've told us so far is which buildings we're going to use, and also their work that they've been doing to take some actions or steps because of COVID-19. And some of the things they shared with us so far is that they're going to supply each precinct with hand sanitizer and CDC approved disinfectant. They're going to provide specific directions to the precinct election officials to regularly clean the voting booths, the sign-in table, and other areas that are there at the polling sites. And then thirdly, they are going to lay out check-in line markers to make sure that people respect at least 6 feet of social distancing while they are in those sites. But again, the election is about 4 weeks from today, so it could change. But as of now, we have been told they are going to take place, and our facilities will be used. And so we're just working with the county to make sure that we're able to provide as safe and as clean environment as possible for individuals that come in and vote. But as you got in the mail, right? The county's encouraging, if you can, please get your absentee ballot and vote from home. So that's a quick update on where we are from the ops side, kind of our big rocks right now. But we're happy to entertain any questions on those 3 pieces or other ones that the board would like to hear more about tonight.
Chase, is it possible that in your understanding for the district to do some kind of testing after the election day to see if there's any contamination of the surfaces in the voting area?
So we can't necessarily do a testing per se, Charlie, but the county said they'll also help us clean afterwards. We're talking about, do in those buildings that they do vote in, do we need to do kind of a hard closure like we did at West a couple weeks ago, where we just close the facilities to everybody for a certain amount of time to ensure that they are properly cleaned, and that even as we allow for limited entry into the buildings, that we've limited any potential harm as much as possible. So we have started talking internally as well as the county about how we go about cleaning and disinfecting the spaces after the voting is complete on the second.
And about how many sites are we talking about? Do you know?
Oh, Dwayne, do you have that number?
14 sites, 15 polling stations. There'll be 2 at West in those 14 buildings.
Okay. So will there be some kind of consistent supervision of the cleaning activities so that we have some assurance that that those activities are thorough at each site?
We'll have custodians posted at each site to monitor the activities, because we'll have restrooms to clean and things like that as well. So we'll have our personnel there to help clean and to make sure it gets clean when they're done.
2 questions for you, Chase. One on the voting. I think I read that Travis Weipert had said maybe on social media that they're looking at doing drive-through type of voting at each location. So I don't know if that's an option as well that they've been discussing with you. And then the other question would be for you and Allison. Has there been any concern, or have you noticed anything about the beef or meat shortage that apparently is happening now, and how that might affect your meals going forward? I know sometimes cold meat sandwiches are one of the staple items in that.
Dwayne, do you want to answer the election question first?
Yeah, I have not heard anything to that nature from the county that they were planning on that at all, on the drive-throughs.
I'm not either, but it's a good note for me to take, Paul, and we'll follow up with Travis on that as we get closer. Allison, do you want to talk about the meat?
Sure. The short answer is no. We have not experienced any shortages in meat at this time, but keep in mind, we use a lot of commodity products and we get those deliveries half a dozen times a year, and those come quite a bit in advance. And so once this hit the news that there could be the potential, I think is what makes people get nervous and start buying up. So we have not seen that situation yet. I think we talked about a week or 2 ago, we've been moving more to some of the heat and eat items that and not as much sandwiches and cold items. So we're trying to use what we have to be financially responsible and also to provide a greater variety to our families. And so I think that's kind of a win-win for both of those situations. So at this point, we haven't experienced anything, and we have a large freezer at the warehouse where we have a lot of things in the freezer to our advantage. So, and after today, we served over 154,000 meals today. FYI.
Up-to-date numbers.
Yep.
Allison, I know, we've always been increasing the amount of local produce that we're able to use. And I think, with the farmers markets being closed, are we still going to be able to connect with some of those farmers and get some of their produce in?
Absolutely. That's a great question. In fact, I just talked with the purchasing gal today. We've made some plans to work with Farm to School because we want to capitalize on the fact that these farmers have all this produce that they may not have a place to sell. We're happy to buy their produce. And so, and we've had struggles trying to get some of the typical bagged items that we like to do. So yeah, we are most interested in that and taking those steps, working with Field to Family to try to source farmers and produce for our menu. So yeah, we're quite excited about that.
Great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is the right place to put this, so feel free, somebody else, to address it. But I saw the governor's announcement today about the CARES Act funding coming through, and that we're slotted to receive a little over, it looked like 1.6 million. I'm curious, is that going to meet our COVID-related increases? I know that we can spend up to September 2022, but could somebody give me an idea? Is that sufficient? It's obviously helpful. Is it sufficient so that maybe we can explore one-to-one Chromebooks for our elementary age kids? What does this number mean kind of for us?
So I'll turn it over to Les for some detail, Lisa, but I'll tell you that that information came to us today, and we have a meeting set up to talk about that on Thursday and about some of the things you mentioned. And so I think we're still, without speculating too much or over promising, we're having those conversations and trying to figure out exactly what it is. It's just so new information that Les might be able to provide some more detail, but I don't want to put him on the spot too much, given that it came to us today as we kind of try to work through that this week. But we'll be able to give you a better update on that here in the next couple of weeks. Les, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Chase's summary is pretty good, and as he indicated, we are meeting Thursday morning to try to determine the expenditures that are most likely to do that or most appropriate, or prioritize those in whatever way we think is best. Unfortunately, we won't know what the legislature is going to do in terms of funding, whether we need to hold any of that back to protect against cuts in the funding, which would be one option. I will be participating with a group of business officials in the Grant Wood area region tomorrow afternoon. And so hopefully there'll be some thoughts from that group as well that I can share with my team on Thursday morning that may help us get our arms around that better. But as you said, Lisa, it is about $1.6 million. And we do have a fair amount of flexibility with how we use that. And so, the technology you mentioned, all of the clean that we've done are options. The workbooks and math books that Amy was talking about earlier are an option, as well as, do we want to cover the pandemic pay that the board has approved for our staff since March 13th. So it's anything from March 13th going forward. So while that's not a solid answer as to exactly what we're going to spend, I think it gives you an idea that, we have to get our arms around it and figure out what the plan is to move forward as a district.
Other questions for Chase or on the operations side?
I guess maybe just facilities wise, maybe for Dwayne. Are any of I noticed some of the major construction projects started, such as Lemmy's. I started to see the tree got cut down and some of the other things started happening there. But how about stuff that's wrapping up? Like I think maybe Southeast was supposed to be done possibly before the school year. or things of that nature? Is that construction all happening, or can you give us any real brief updates on what's finishing up versus what's starting?
Yeah, Southeast is almost done. With having those students, I think it'll probably be done ahead of schedule. It's looking pretty good. Kirkwood and Grantwood are both moving along as expected. Again, we're getting a little jump on summer, which is helpful there. We're just getting started. Well, West High is going as well. It's going well as well. And then Northwest, we're just getting started on the gymnasium addition, and we're starting the asbestos abatement in the north end of the building and the cafeteria and getting that going. Lemmy, they moved a job site trailer and they're getting ready to start some of that foundation work. And the other one, Shimmick, we need to do a little asbestos abatement, and we're waiting till after the workbook distribution today because we're starting on the very front end of the building. So once we got all that out of the way, this week we'll be starting Shimmick. We're getting started at Wickham and Horn as well. So they're just getting started. I think all the projects are moving fairly well.
And then just one that I see the machines consistently moving south on the old Hooverland, is the geothermal almost done then at the wells at City High?
Right, there's 4 large, what I call large or deep wells that go down to the aquifer, so they take time. There's 2 extraction and 2 wells that will dump the water back into the aquifer, but I look for them to be done before fall. They actually pulled off for a few days because their company didn't want to work in the hot spot of Johnson County. So we're also finding that the company, and just as kind of a side to that, the company that's doing the lights on Bates Field doesn't want to come to Johnson County either. So we're getting some of that pushback from contractors. I don't know that it's a big issue working in the outdoors on a football field, but we're getting some pushback because we're Johnson County.
So if you are getting pushback like that, will that affect the contracts, or how does that all play out?
I told them as long as they got their contract done and it was complete by the 1st of August, I had no issue with how many days they stayed or came. But they were still obliged to finish by August 1st. So it would be ready for football.
And if they don't, because if it's still a hotbed here for a while, that may not happen. What happens then?
I'll have to think about it. I haven't really thought about what the consequences are. I mean, there may be some financial penalties in the contract, but I'd rather see them get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, thanks folks. Thanks Chase, thanks Amy, thanks Matt for the updates tonight. Thanks Steve. Appreciate all that you're doing to keep the district moving forward in these weird times. So we're going to move on to agenda setting. We have a P&G committee meeting on May 11th. And then we have a board agenda in front of you for May 12th, where we've got community comment, a consent agenda, a presentation on third quarter financial report. We have a discussion item, the procedures for continuous learning update. Couple ideas have come forward for additional, or one idea at least, for additional item on May 12th. Is there an update on our solar PPA activity? I think Steve, you would be ready to present some information on that.
And actually, I'm working with Joe on that, and the idea is that he'll prepare and hopefully have to before the board meeting a summary of information on PPA that he can then, power purchase agreements that he can then follow up with you at the board meeting and then talk about next steps, which could include going forward with a request for quote process to secure more information from some of the 4 providers who've expressed interest in that.
Very good, thanks. Is there anything for addition to the May 12th regular board meeting? There is a couple other additional board sessions for consideration, a closed session regarding the Lucas review, and that's something that we would be proposing for May 12th as well. And then, of course, there is the board retreat. Thanks to everyone for filling in. This is unprecedented. All directors can attend all sessions because kids are not going anywhere and don't have anything to do on Saturday. So I'm going to ask. I think I'd rather get into it and go for the May 16th session, but I wanted to get directors' view on that and see if that's the May 16th 9 to 11 slot works for everybody. And we'll get an agenda out around that, but it'll be a review of our goals from this past year, a look at goals for our future year. Things for consideration would be the things that we've talked about in board meetings, the Battelle work and slotting that work in, the interim superintendent, or sorry, the superintendent search, and other priorities that we will be needing to look at and to figure out a way to prioritize. FMP 2.0 has been on our list for quite some time. Obviously, there's a lot of work around the equity agenda. And so this would just be a good opportunity for the board to gather in a retreat session to kind of do a little bit of retrospective and then also future planning. So are folks good with May 16th, or would you prefer the 23rd or 30th?
May 16th is fine with me, but I could go with the other dates too, whatever.
I just soon get into it and start
May
having these
16th is
conversations.
fine
Yeah,
with me.
I could see that. Yeah.
Others, 16th? Going once, going twice? I'm seeing heads nod, thumbs up. Okay, so we'll schedule our board agenda for May 16th, 9 to 11. We'll look at that closed session before our next board meeting on May 12th. And then any other items besides the addition of the PPA matter for May 12th.
Janet, it's Chase. We might want to put a hold for an exempt session.
Yeah, so let's do that. Do you have a sense, Chase, you think we probably need 30 minutes?
Yep.
So we might need to do one session before the board meeting and one session after, don't you think, just to ensure that we have enough time?
Yeah, we may want to do that so we're not rushed.
So exempt before and closed after?
We can do that.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. Anything else, folks, for the good of the cause tonight? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening. Appreciate it. Take care. Be safe.
Thanks, Janet.
See ya.